A dark voice. It was an ordinary night, one of those when the routine seemed to follow the same monotonous rhythm as always. I was home alone after a long and exhausting day at work. The clock read almost 10 p.m., and the stress of the office was still etched in my mind. I needed peace. I sank into the couch, feet up, with a glass of water beside me. The sound of the fan, the only noise in the house, calmed me. But the tranquility didn't last long. The house lights began to flicker strangely. First a slight tremor, as if an invisible energy was affecting the bulbs. Then a crackle, a dry, distant sound, but it resonated like a blow in the silence of the night. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The lights went out completely. I stayed there in the dark for a moment. I wasn't immediately scared, as blackouts weren't uncommon on my street. The electrical system in the area was old and occasionally succumbed to these failures. But something about that night felt different. I couldn't explain exactly what, but there was something in the air, a sense of oppression. I got up slowly, my body moving on autopilot. Blackouts had happened before, so I knew where the candles and matches were kept. I headed to the kitchen, my feet touching the cold floor. As I approached the drawer, something strange happened. I was no longer alone. It was a whisper, low, almost imperceptible, but I heard it. Fulano, my name. A soft voice, laden with something indescribable. I froze, my heart beating faster. It wasn't my voice. It wasn't anyone from my family. A chilling sensation ran down my spine. I stood still, trying to understand what was happening. Silence filled the room for a few seconds, and then the whisper came again. Fulano! This time the voice was closer. I didn't dare take a deep breath, fearing that any movement might reveal my position. I looked around in the darkness, but the only sound was my own racing heartbeat. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Something was there, something that shouldn't be. Trying not to panic, I took a hesitant step toward the drawer. The voice came closer still, and I could almost hear soft breathing, as if someone was there just waiting for me to turn around. I could feel the pressure in the air. It was as if I were being watched. Fulano. It was so clear now it seemed to be inside my head. I didn't know what to do anymore. Panic began to set in, and I moved slowly, more out of a need to do something than a rational decision. I managed to reach the drawer. My fingers touched the matches, and with trembling hands I lit the first candle. The small flame was like a beacon, trying to push back the darkness that seemed to engulf me. The candlelight flickered in front of me, illuminating only a narrow circle around me. I looked toward the hallway. Nothing, no shadows, no figures. I sighed in relief, thinking that maybe my overworked mind was playing tricks on me. But then a new sensation washed over me. The candlelight wavered, and I could swear I felt a presence behind me. The air was heavy and the sound of a whisper returned, now so close it froze me. "I'm here." It was so clear and terrifying that I almost dropped the candle. The voice, now much stronger and deeper, seemed to be inside my head. I could no longer distinguish whether it was real or if I was losing my sanity. Fear paralyzed me. It couldn't be anyone from my family. They were all out that night. But who else could it be, and how? Where? "I'm here." This time the voice seemed to drag itself, as if crawling along the floor, almost a muffled growl. The candle flickered. I looked around, but nothing moved. There was no one there. No form, no shadow. Just the empty hallway. But then, an indescribable feeling took hold of me. I was no longer alone. It wasn't the house that was empty. Something was there with me. Something invisible. Something I couldn't see, but that watched me with a keen and malevolent attention. Fear made me act on impulse. Without thinking, I ran toward the front door. The candle was still trembling in my hand, but I no longer cared about it. The voice had stopped, but I knew I couldn't stay there a second longer. I opened the door and ran into the street, gasping for breath, without looking back. I needed distance from that. As I ran, I heard the crackle of the house lights turning back on, followed by an icy wind that seemed to follow me. Fear blinded me, but something told me that voice wasn't an illusion. Something was inside that house, something that was still waiting for me. I didn't know what it was, but the thought wouldn't leave me. Now all I can do is wait for morning to come. And when it does, I'll have to return to face whatever it is that hides there in the darkness of my house. Something I now knew without a doubt was watching me. Something I couldn't see, but that was very, very close. The silence before the storm, it was an ordinary night, or at least it should have been. After an endless day at work, I could barely wait to get home and throw myself onto the couch. No commitments, no problems, just me and the peace of my house. When I finally walked in, a sense of relief washed over me. I placed my beer on the table, went to the couch, and stretched out, trying to relax as the sound of the street faded away. There was nothing I wanted more than to rest, but what should have been a calm night quickly turned into something completely different. The lights in the house began to flicker, first one, then another, until they all started flashing erratically. An irregular sequence, as if something was interfering with the electricity. At first I thought it was just a temporary issue, perhaps a problem with the local power grid. It wasn't unusual, but before I could relax again, the lights went out completely. Darkness enveloped me instantly, and the silence that followed was even deeper than usual. I didn't move right away, trying to process the situation. Blackouts happened from time to time, but what unsettled me that night was the strange atmosphere hanging in the air. Something wasn't right. I got up slowly, my feet touching the cold living room floor. I knew where the candles and matches were, so I tried to make my way toward the kitchen where they were stored. The sound of my breathing mixed with the dense, almost uncomfortable silence. But then something made me stop. At first it was a low whisper, like a breeze passing through the cracks of a window, but there was no wind. The air was still, immersed in that impenetrable darkness. I strained my ears, trying to make sense of what was happening. The sound stopped, but the cold that gripped my body didn't go away. Something wasn't right. Something was there with me, but I didn't know what. I froze, unsure of what to do. What was that sound? It was as if something was moving through the house, but it couldn't be. I was alone, I knew that. Or at least I thought I did. The house was silent, but it was a strange, tense silence. I began to feel as if I was being watched, observed by an invisible presence, something that didn't reveal itself but was there, waiting. And then I heard it again. But this time, it wasn't just the sound of something moving. It was something much more human. A muffled sound, as if someone was breathing heavily, very close to me. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the normal creaks of an empty house. It was labored breathing, as if someone was waiting in the dark, waiting for me to move, waiting for me to make a sound. Something or someone was there. The feeling of being watched intensified, and my heart started pounding. I wanted to run to my room, lock the door, and wait until morning. But my legs felt heavy, as if the house itself was holding me back. I knew I shouldn't investigate, that I should just wait for the lights to return, but the need to know what was happening consumed me. So I pressed on, once more trying to navigate the dark hallway. I just wanted the lights to come back. I just wanted everything to go back to normal. But what unsettled me the most was that, even as I was starting to adjust to the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was so close, I could feel their breath. With every passing second, the silence grew deeper, more oppressive. Then suddenly a crack. The lights came back on. I almost jumped in fright. The house was lit again, as if nothing had happened. The breathing was gone. There was nothing else, just the sound of the fan, the same sound that had been there when I arrived. Everything seemed to be in its place, but the fear didn't leave me. The feeling of being watched remained, as if the empty space of the house was filled with something that shouldn't be there. I sat on the couch again, unsure of what to do. What had that been? An illusion? My mind was tired, maybe. But even so, something in my chest told me otherwise. Something had watched me that night, and the silence before the storm hadn't just been the emptiness of the house. Something was there, something I didn't want to encounter again. The feeling of being watched has never left me. Even with the lights on, I knew that presence, that strange thing was still there, waiting. Sometimes, I think I was never really alone that night. And even now, when the lights flicker, my body tenses. The sensation that there's something in the darkness watching me still haunts me, like a shadow waiting to reveal itself. The reflection in the glass, it was a night like any other. After an exhausting day at work, I finally arrived home. The clock was nearing 11 p.m., and I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. Work had been tougher than usual. Endless meetings, reports, and more reports. All I wanted was to rest. I didn't care that the TV was off or that the lights were out. What I truly longed for was the comforting silence of my home and a cold beer to ease my stress. The house was quiet when I entered, and that silence felt welcoming after such a heavy day. I placed the beer on the coffee table and collapsed onto the couch, feeling my body slowly unwind. The distant sound of the street, cars passing by, it all seemed irrelevant. It was as if the world outside was a distant reality. That's when, suddenly, the lights went out. Small occasional blackouts weren't unusual for me. In that area, the electrical grid was old and unreliable, especially at night. Normally, I would just wait a few minutes for everything to come back on, but that night was different. The feeling was immediate. A shiver ran down my spine. The darkness didn't feel like just the absence of light. It had a density, a strange weight I couldn't explain. It was as if the darkness were alive, something surrounding me and making me feel watched. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just another typical blackout. I got up from the couch and headed to the kitchen where I kept the candles. The air was cold, much colder than usual, and the sensation of weight increased with every step I took. When I finally found the candle and lit it, the flame flickered as though a breeze were threatening to extinguish it. But there was no wind. It was a strange phenomenon, but I didn't give it much thought. Maybe the candle was old or the wax a bit damp. As the candlelight illuminated the room, I noticed something unusual. In one of the living room windows, something reflected the light strangely. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but it wasn't. The reflection was there, clear and unmoving. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to understand what I was seeing, and then realized there was no one at the window. There was no one outside the house. The night was far too quiet, yet the reflection remained, still and unyielding. I didn't know what to think. The glass was clean, but the image reflected wasn't mine. It was something different, something that moved with an unsettling slowness, as if it were trying to mimic my movements. I turned away slowly, then looked back at the glass. The figure in the reflection seemed to be watching me, as though it were waiting for some kind of reaction. That reflection wasn't mine. It wasn't an exact copy of what I was doing. It was something distorted, a slightly twisted version of me, like a shadow unable to align properly with the light. My heart raced. I tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion, that my eyes were playing tricks on me. The house was silent, with no movement, but that reflection didn't disappear. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them again, it was still there. Every time I moved, the image in the glass seemed to try to mimic me, but in a disjointed way, as though it wasn't capable of following my gestures correctly. It felt like there was a presence there, watching, waiting. The reflection didn't have an expression, but the sensation it gave me was unmistakable. It was watching me, waiting for the right moment to act. I closed my eyes tightly, trying to push away the growing fear. I took a deep breath and counted to 10, but when I opened my eyes, the reflection was still there, clearer than ever. I felt a pressure in my chest, as though someone was watching my every move. A deep fear began to spread through me, and I didn't know what to do. The reflection remained motionless, but I knew deep down that it wasn't just reflecting my movements. It was distorted. It was waiting for something. The candle's flame flickered again as if a breeze was about to extinguish it. The house was in complete silence. No sound, no movement, except my own. But I knew something wasn't right. The darkness seemed to close in around me, heavier than before. The feeling of being watched didn't leave me. I tried to move away from the window, but my feet felt heavy, as if the floor were holding me in place. I turned and looked at the reflection again. Something had changed. The figure in the glass seemed closer, more defined. The image was more distorted, almost monstrous. I felt its presence, its gaze, as if it were standing right in front of me. I no longer knew what was real and what wasn't, and then, with an indescribable chill, I realized I was no longer alone in the house. Not physically, but that presence, that entity I couldn't see, was there, waiting for me to move, waiting for the right moment to act. I could no longer tell where my image ended and where its image began. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. The reflection in the glass continued to follow me, like a shadow adapting to my every move. My body was paralyzed by fear, and no matter how much I wanted to leave, I knew I couldn't. There was no escape from that presence. The blackout continued, the house remained cold and silent, and even with the candlelight still flickering, the reflection in the glass never disappeared. I didn't know if I saw it one last time, or if it saw me for the last time. But one thing was certain, that vague and menacing gaze never left me. It was there, watching me, waiting, and I, powerless, no longer knew whom or what to trust.